2025 TAC planning meeting. My name is Gina Midico with MnDOT Metro District Planning, and I am the TAC planning chair. So I will call the meeting to order at 1:01 p.m. The first item of business today is the approval of the agenda. If nobody has any additions or changes, we can approve that, but I'll pause here to see if anyone has any suggested modifications. All right, hearing none, the agenda is approved. The next item is the approval of the September 11th, 2025 TAC planning minutes. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review. And if so, I would entertain a motion to approve. All right, who is that, Patrick?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. We have a motion from Patrick Boylan, and I'm looking for a second.
Yep, Drew Flummer.
All right, thank you, Drew. Any additional discussion or questions? All right, seeing none, I'll have Jed take the roll. So please indicate your vote when Jed calls your name. Thanks.
Jorge Bernal, Anoka County.
Aye.
Mark Culver, Brooklyn Park. Drew Flummer, Carver County.
Aye.
Charlie Howley, Chanhassen. Scott Peters, Dakota County.
Aye.
Dan Patterson, Hennepin County.
Aye.
Bridget Reef, Mac. Patrick Boylan, Community Development.
Aye.
David Burns, MTS. David Burns, MTS. Dave, I'll come back to you. You are a chipmunk today. Patrick Haney, Metro Transit.
Aye.
Bria Fast, City of Minneapolis. Gina Midico, MnDOT.
Aye.
Innocent AO, MPCA. Kevin Roggenbuck, Ramsey County.
Aye.
Anton Jervy, City of St. Paul.
Aye.
Craig Jensen, Scott County.
I'll abstain. I wasn't here.
Sunita Kasishwa, Suburban Transit.
Aye.
Elaine Katsukos, Tab Coordinator.
Aye.
Sarah Allen, Washington County.
It's Maddie Dahlheimer as Sarah's alternate today, and I'll abstain.
Thank you. Chris Hertzel, Woodsbury. David Burns, MTS.
Aye. Do I sound okay now? Or?
Yep, I've got you.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Chair, there were 12 ayes, no noes, and 2 abstentions.
All right. Thank you. We have one business item today and a few information items. The first item, the business item, is one we heard a preview of last month, which is the recommendation, it's got a long title, of Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, RBTN, and Regional Bicycle Barrier Map changes and related actions. Is Steve here to present?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me? Yeah, I'm.
Okay. Yep, I can see you now, and I see your presentation. So I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. Yes, I presented the details, all the details of the RBTN Regional Bicycle Barrier updates and staff evaluations at the info item last month. So today, at that time, there weren't any, we didn't have any maps available. So we just wanted to run through, take a few minutes to just run through these maps, which are the basis for your action item today. So beginning with, hang on. Next slide. I got it. Beginning with regional bicycle barriers, we had 4 proposed changes shown here. So our updated map includes 3 new regional bicycle expressway barriers in Scott County and 1 shift of a regional bicycle barrier crossing improvement area in the city of Medina to align with a planned regional trail crossing of Trunk Highway 55. All these changes are recommended to be included in the updated regional bike barriers map. And those changes are all listed in table A within the action transmittal itself. And so I'm going to just show you zoomed in locals on these 4 changes. The map on the left is Scott County, the 3 new bicycle barrier expressway barriers on 3 separate county state aid highways in Shakopee and Prior Lake. And the map on the left shows the shift of an existing tier 2 regional bicycle barrier crossing improvement area in Medina. The shift is 1/10 of a mile to the west and shows a relationship to our 2 barriers in that area as well. So those are the changes we're talking about. And then we show those changes highlighted here in relationship to the existing regional bicycle barriers map. So that's what we're voting to include in the map today. And the next one, so now on the Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, we have 3 components of changes that we're considering. They're all been included in the map. We have 8 proposed changes determined to be so minor to be eligible for administrative modification. So those will be approved administratively. Those 8 changes are listed in table B of the AT. In addition, we had 48 proposed changes that after staff evaluations are recommended for approval in table D. And then 6 proposed route additions were reviewed specifically with the Bike Ped Planning Technical Work Group. They are also recommended for approval with exceptions to the preferred spacing guidelines, and those are listed in table E. All these changes are recommended to be included in the updated RBTN map to be released for public release as part of the 2026 regional solicitation application packet. So specific, all the changes, proposed RBTN route changes are shown here. I'll just leave this up for a few seconds for you to digest. We have an assortment of new corridors, new alignments, shifted corridor. The administrative adjustments are also included here, and these are the minor ones in the city of St. Paul in this area here, and a couple in Minneapolis, minor shift and I just jumped ahead, sorry about that. And a reversion to a corridor from an alignment is also administrative. So those are all the changes. And then finally, the cumulative changes, the proposed changes are highlighted here, showing in relationship to the existing RBTN corridors and alignments. And this map is also included in the action transmittal, as was the summary map, cumulative map for the regional bike barriers. So those are the maps I wanted to walk through today. I'm happy to entertain any questions the committee might have.
Thanks, Steve. Does anyone from the committee have any questions or comments? Go ahead. Is that Scott?
Madam Chair, thank you. Steve, can you explain? I know that you've been working with John and Kurt for Dakota County previously with this, but can you explain the section in Inver Grove Heights that was removed?
Yeah, let me go back to the appropriate map here. Yeah, so that was a corridor. So it's not as drastic as it sounds. So this was a corridor, and it's being approved as an alignment. So we're designating an alignment for that corridor. So when you designate a new alignment, you take out the corridor. It's in lieu of the corridor. And then the ends, the east end, this is CASA 28 in Dakota County. So the west end of that and the east end of that, those are new alignments.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, like I said, this is an action item with the, thanks Jed, with the requested action shown on the screen. Would anyone care to make a motion?
Yeah, this is Drew Flummer. I'll make a motion to approve it.
All right. Thanks, Drew. Jed, do you need me to read that action?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Was that Patrick? Sorry. I
Yeah.
couldn't see. Okay, thanks. So we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion or questions? Okay, seeing none, I think we can go ahead and take the roll call vote.
Jorge Bernal, Anoka County.
Aye.
Mark Culver, Brooklyn Park. Drew Flummer, Carver County.
Aye.
Charlie Howley, Chanhassen.
Aye.
Scott Peters, Dakota County.
Aye.
Dan Patterson, Hennepin County.
Aye.
Bridget Reef, Mac. Patrick Boylan, Community Development.
Aye.
David Burns, MTS.
Aye.
Patrick Haney, Metro Transit.
Aye.
Maria Fast, City of Minneapolis.
Aye.
Gina Medico, MnDOT.
Aye.
Innocent AO, MPCA. Kevin Roggenbuck, Ramsey County.
Aye.
Anton Jervy, City of St. Paul.
Aye.
Craig Jensen, Scott County.
Aye.
Sunita Kasishwa, Suburban Transit.
Aye.
Elaine Kutsukos, Tab Coordinator. Elaine, I could not hear you. I'll come back to you. Maddie Dahlheimer, Washington County.
Aye.
Chris Hertzel, Woodbury.
Aye.
And Elaine Kutsukos, Tab Coordinator.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair, there were 17 ayes, no noes, and no abstentions.
Thanks, Jed. That was the business item we had today. So moving on to the information items. So the first one is from MnDOT, and I don't know actually how often MnDOT comes and presents our plans to TAC planning. This was just sort of added when we had a discussion among Council and MnDOT staff. But Metro District has been working on a Metro District freight plan for the last, I think, couple of years. And Mackenzie Turner Bargan, Metro District's multimodal planning director, will be here to present it. And my name is on this, but actually I won't do anything other than introduce it. And then we also have joining Mackenzie, Jack Johansson from our central office of Freight and Commercial Vehicles. Did I get all those letters right, Jack?
Yes, ending
Okay.
with operations. Yeah.
And operations. Okay, thank you. I knew there was another O, but so Jack will be here to support Mackenzie with the presentation. I apologize, we were not able to get the presentation out in advance. We've been having some technical issues here today at MnDOT. Internet appears to be working okay so far. Cross our fingers. I'm still here, but we can't access any of our files. So, but Jack was able to get it over to Jed. So I think we have a presentation to share. And I don't know, Jed, if you're going to operate it or if Mackenzie or
Yeah,
Jack
actually, I had the PowerPoint file on my computer, so I'm actually able to run it through on my end.
if I can share my screen.
Okay, I will turn it over to you then.
Thanks, Gina.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
yeah, I'm present, so Jay should be able to note that.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is everybody able to see the presentation? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks for having us here today. As Gina said, I'm Mackenzie Turner Bargan. I am the MnDOT Metro District Multimodal Planning Director, and accompanied by Jack Johansson, a principal planner with the MnDOT Office of Freight and Commercial Vehicles Operations. And so we are happy to share with you a little bit about the Metro District Freight Plan today. Jack will kick things off for us, and then I'll pick up partway through the presentation, and we should have some time for questions for you. So go ahead, Jack.
Thank you. Yep, so working on the project, primarily Mackenzie Turner Bargan and myself from MnDOT's central office, the freight office, and then on the screen, a few of the others at MnDOT that have helped us out with the project and the creation of it. So first, before diving into some specific details, zooming out, we're looking to just share to the group here at a high level what the plan is, going through the objective of it, an overview of the plan, how the plan is going to be implemented, then the schedule of where we are now and what that path is to completion with it. So first here, the objective of the Metro District Freight Plan here is on the screen to provide a clear understanding of the multimodal freight system, how local industries use the system, and their needs and issues, so MnDOT's policy and programming decisions can be better informed. So that's going to consider policy, programs, partnerships MnDOT can enter in, and then projects themselves. So the district freight plan here is one in a series of 7 other district planning efforts throughout the state that have occurred, I think, since about 2016 or so when the first one kicked off. And these district plans are part of implementing our statewide freight plan. So at MnDOT, we have our 50-year vision. Underneath that is the 20-year statewide multimodal transportation plan that then designate all the modal plans that MnDOT does. So from biking to freight to rail, et cetera. And that statewide freight plan has an investment plan within it that details what actions MnDOT is going to take to further investigate and advance freight. And though one of those are the district freight plans. So these district freight plans are able to drill down at a more operational level, a shorter term than that statewide freight plan does. The state freight plan is a 20-year plan. It's more higher level for the entire state, looking at policies, but this district plan will help look at identified specific needs and look at ways those specific needs could be incorporated into a project, something that could be addressed in the shorter term. So you can see on the graphic there, the statewide freight vision and goals leads to performance measures that we'll get into in a few slides that identify freight system needs that then turns recommendations to then advance those needs themselves with investments. So this is the last of the series of 8 district plans throughout the state that is completing about a year after the statewide freight plan wrapped up last November of 2024. So speaking of that statewide freight plan, the Metro District Freight Plan goals are kind of built off of the goals from that statewide freight plan, and those statewide freight plan goals are kind of made in the context of the statewide multimodal transportation plan and the 50-year vision. So the approach to developing these goals was created in the context of the planning work that's already been done within that statewide freight plan that will then inform what those performance metrics and needs that are identified through that process are. And to get there was plenty of engagement done throughout the planning process. At MnDOT, we had a statewide freight advisory committee. Throughout this plan, we also created a Metro District Freight Advisory Committee. And that group was engaged with many times throughout the planning process. Rooms of county public works leaders and freight industry leaders themselves giving input on the plan as it's being created. And that is a group that could also be tapped in for project-specific input for the Metro District to have freight considerations for ongoing projects. There's also community freight surveys and comment maps throughout the process of the plan. There was industry leader interviews to get freight expertise incorporated into the plan. We also had some neighborhood community interviews throughout the planning process to hear from everyday people, their experiences with freight and what they see in their neighborhood. Then a lot of internal coordination as well throughout the plan within Metro District, within the engineers and the planners and those in program delivery to get their expertise and their input on what we've developed throughout the plan. In addition to what this plan set out itself to do specifically with that, there was a lot of other statewide and metro area freight planning that has occurred over recent years. So one of them was the statewide freight plan that concluded about a year ago. So there was a lot of concurrent planning work happening at the time. So if engagement was being done for the statewide freight plan, that's something that could also help inform this Metro District freight plan. Prior to this Metro District freight plan, and there was the urban freight perspective studies where many interviews took place with industry freight businesses in the metro to get their input on day-to-day operations, how they use the freight facilities, the state highways, and learn of what we could be doing better or what to be considering into projects. So all that interview gathering, the data from that also helped inform this plan, as well as the Met Council truck corridors 2017 and 2021 update that was also considered and inputted into the plan. So with that, I would like to hand it on over to Mackenzie to take the next few slides, and I can run them for you.
Super, thanks, Jack. So with that, into the kind of next piece of things here, we'll dig a bit into the freight needs identified on MnDOT's trunk highway system in Metro District. And as we are moving into the space of discussing the freight need categories and the process for identifying and scoring freight needs and those next pieces, just wanted to reference that the plan itself has kind of that first part of the objective being to provide a clearer understanding of the multimodal freight system and how local industries use the system and their needs and issues. And so this is beginning to just share a little bit more information around the needs and issues portion of things coming out of and based on the information that was gathered in the aspects that Jack had mentioned. So for those freight need categories, these are the three categories that things were filed into. So for safety, how frequent and severe are freight-related crashes, mobility considerations with regard to how easy, reliably is freight able to move along the system and the network, and then condition covering the maintenance and condition of freight infrastructure itself within the highway system. Next, Jack. So from the statewide perspective, the state freight plan need categories, again, safety, condition, mobility, how this looks like what this looks like on a statewide level is that for most districts, safety was a leading freight need, followed closely oftentimes by mobility. In Metro District and District 4, mobility was identified as the leading freight need in those two districts. In the map inset, you can see a closer snapshot of Metro District in particular. just highlighting some of the locations on the system. It's not super easy to see this. That's okay. Just as an illustrative sort of demonstration of what we were looking at. Next. So getting into the freight needs within Metro District. So using the trunk highway network in the Metro District and those categories that were described of safety, mobility, and condition, there were a number of different evaluation criteria that were identified within each of those categories to help us apply that methodology to our system and highlight areas that had to bring forward and highlight areas that had distinct issues with regard to mobility, safety, or condition. And so you can see here on the map just how the system was scored with some of the total scores reflected there. Maximum score was 65. Highest score in Metro District was 34, and that was in a segment on 494. One important aspect of how this methodology for identifying and scoring needs was applied in Metro District. So this is something, the scoring process is something that was consistent through all the district plans. And in Metro District, because of the system that exists here, we decided to score interstate and non-interstate segments of the highway system separately. Let's see, and I think there's another pop-up on this slide if you want to click forward for one. There we go. So this just gives the rundown of some of the scoring and how it was applied. Again, the weighting is consistent with how this was applied across the state. And I just wanted to point out some of the sub kind of criteria that are in each of the different categories here that were used for scoring. So at the very top there, you've got volume scoring factors. And so that's something that took a look at the heavy commercial AADT, so the truck volume score and percentages of total traffic, and then gets into those subcategories of safety, mobility, and condition. So you can see what the criteria was within each of those. So in mobility, for example, we looked at not only congestion, but also truck travel time reliability. And also within that space is bridge vertical underclearance and low bridge weight. So that's some of these things, could possibly fall into the attribute of possibly being condition. But as you can see, condition covers the pavement condition score and the bridge condition score, whereas bridge vertical underclearance, if we have a low underclearance, that is more of a mobility issue because it forces different trucks to have to take different routes if they are restricted by that low clearance in a way that would make them unable to travel that direction or that route rather. And same with the low bridge weight. If we have bridges that are restricted to lower weights, that has an effect and an impact on where heavier trucks are allowed to route to get to their destinations and make their trips. Let's see, one additional thing to point out is that with regard to the stakeholder identified factors, we collected information from the stakeholder engagement that was conducted, as well as stakeholder identified issues that came from the urban freight perspectives studies that were conducted, and then categorized those as issues of safety, mobility, or condition. And that then was a bonus scoring factor for this process. Next, Jack. So more diving a little bit deeper into the stakeholder identified issues. As mentioned, the Urban Freight Perspective Study Phase 1 and 2. So these preceded the development of the Metro District Freight Plan. And we wanted, since we had all those conversations, this was a way for us to pull that information that had been gathered through that intensive process of hosting conversations and interviews and discussions with freight stakeholders and continue to pull forward those concerns that were identified through that process and build upon that. And then in addition, the engagement processes and activities that happened as part of the district freight plan process that Jack, there we go. Sorry, Jack. That Jack had covered earlier in the presentation related to, interviews with stakeholders, the Metro District Freight Advisory Committee and their input. We also visited and presented to the Capital Infrastructure or Capital Investments Committee, CIC, and got their feedback on the process a few different times as well, in addition to online surveys and mapping, interactive mapping tools that were used. And so this is just a breakdown of the number of roadway segments with identified issues by category from those stakeholder identified issues and how that stacked up. Next, please, Jack. And so some of the themes coming out of the stakeholder identified issues and perspectives, you can see it kind of runs the gamut here, but everything from the impact of congestion to signage, truck parking. Truck parking is an issue that was referenced a lot, and that's something that we will continue to be working on as an agency with an upcoming truck parking study that Jack is leading. And if there are questions about that, he can probably speak to that. But also issues of maintenance like snow and ice removal, interchanges. So that's specifically along with intersection design was something that we heard about from different stakeholders along the way. Height weight restrictions, I think there's nothing on here that was too surprising, I don't think, for us. And so, but wanted to share kind of those overarching themes that were identified. Next, please. So getting into the draft freight plan document that we have for the Metro District Freight Plan. This is just a high level capture of the what's included in each of the chapters of that document. And we will get into, in just a few slides here, some more information on how to take a look at that. But really, at the end of the day, the Metro District Freight Plan is, or has been, an opportunity to get more clarity and information and compile in one place, in one document, in one plan, kind of that base level understanding of our multimodal freight system in the Metro District, and then be able to identify needs and build from there going forward with, we have this information now of the conditions that exist and what do we want to do that? What do we do next? And so does capture some information regarding our industry sectors and the breakdown of that, as you can see in the figure shared here, just sharing a breakdown of the by millions of tons of cargo moved by all modes, what that breakdown looks like. So I would say that chapters 3 and 4 cover largely just those issues that we shared with you, some of the challenges, need identification and scoring, and then begins to get into some of the information around programming and the project development process. And so, and just how MnDOT approaches our process for determining what gets invested in next. And then chapter 5 captures recommendations and implementation, and then next steps looking forward. Next, please. So right now, this is great timing. So thank you for letting us come and present to you some information on this today. We are currently in the middle of the public review and comment period for the Metro District Freight Plan. So that opened up on I think Friday, September 26th. It will remain open for review and comment through the end of the day on Sunday, October 19th. The link that's provided here will take you to the Let's Talk Transportation webpage for the District Freight Plan. And then within that page, you can review the draft plan, send us any questions that you have, provide comments through a form that is available on that page. And then also, if interested, sign up for future freight updates. Caveat on this slide, that link, it may or may not take you to anything right now because of aforementioned technical issues that the state is experiencing. So should be available soon if it's not available today. So please do check back if that link and if you're unable to access that today, which I think it's strongly likely that you will not be able to access it. But we will keep folks posted on when it becomes available once again. Next, please. Okay, we can go to the next one. So next steps. This gets into just, I guess, highlighting and maybe foreshadowing some of the implementation next steps that we've identified with, kind of taking this plan as a document that gathers that information to better understand what is our multimodal freight system? How do those different pieces of the multiple modes interact with one another on our system? What does that look like for intermodal yards, for highway versus freight, pipelines, shipping, ports, all those pieces? And then going into the needs portion of things, though, just important to reference that the needs did look specifically at the MnDOT state highway system within Metro District, since that is the network and system that MnDOT and Metro District have the jurisdiction over and are planning investments and developing projects on. So some of those next steps: reviewing existing Metro District planning and project development processes and identifying opportunities for freight need integration. Within the multimodal planning unit that I lead, we lead multimodal planning for freight, for people biking and walking, ADA, and then some transit woven in there. And over the past, decade or so, there's been a really concerted effort to move things along and get some advancement and integration around biking, walking, and ADA. And freight is something that we have a lot of opportunities for now, taking this information that we've gathered and taking kind of a similar approach to take a closer look at our different processes that are kind of Metro District's bread and butter, and understanding how we can use the information we have now regarding freight needs and freight considerations and better weave those in at the correct times throughout that process. And in addition, additional coordination with our program management staff to identify and leverage freight improvement funding opportunities. So many of you recently perhaps saw that there was a solicitation for the Minnesota Highway Freight Program. And so that's one of those many opportunities, and kind of one of the programs out there that was in part the impetus for district freight plans to, again, just take those steps to more clearly identify where to look first for freight investments and opportunities to continue advancing improvements in efficiency for that system. And then also prioritizing identified freight need locations for further study and convening partner agencies. This is where in Metro District, just the sheer density of different jurisdictional authorities of different modes, highways, systems, functionals, places comes to bear, and each individual, opportunity for investment or need that's identified requires that we work collaboratively with our different agency partners. And so where some of the other district plans may have been able to get to the point of identifying, specific project locations and solutions for the needs that are present there, our plan does not get to that point, and that will come hereafter with the work that we do as a district to identify investments and develop projects further. And so this is really just speaking to that part of things. One area that came up over and over again for us was intermodal yards. And that is a thing where our system serves a lot of freight traffic that is headed to intermodal yards, and then it leaves the state highway system to access either county systems or local systems to then access those spaces. And that has a lot of different issues, challenges, and impacts, not only for those moving the freight, but also for the residents and communities and, just folks who exist in those spaces as well. So that's kind of an example of one of the items that we are just anxious to dig into a little bit further, but that will obviously take a lot of collaboration and partnering with all other agencies involved. Next. And so this is just a bit of a reminder, a refresh on MnDOT's project development process. So this is some of just highlighting some of and sharing the project development process as one of the, I guess, representations of that process that we internal staff at Metro District can look to and then better understand at what point in each of these aspects of that project development process we may have additional opportunities to integrate, to better integrate freight considerations and the needs that have been identified. Next, please. And just a little slightly different capture of that. So let's see. Nope, we can go to the next one. Thanks, Jack. And so just to touch briefly on the Metro District Freight Advisory Committee, mentioned as something that was created to help support and inform the Metro District Freight Plan process, and with the intention that once we move through the process of creating the district freight plan, that then we would have a group of trusted freight experts to help weigh in on or request information from the district as well on different topics that they are noticing or seeing or want to learn more about, but also an opportunity for Metro District staff to take questions or request input on projects or studies that they're working on. So that's the hope, is that we will continue going forward with that as a resource for the district. Next. So to wrap up, timeline, as I mentioned, the public review and comment period opened on September 26th. It will close at end of day on Sunday, October 9th or 19th rather. And then following the public review and comment period closing, we will then have an opportunity to review and assess the different comments that we receive to get a sense of what revisions, updates, or changes we may need to make to the district freight plan. And then we hope to have the final Metro District Freight Plan ready for release before the end of the year. Next. I think that's it. So thank you very much. And if there's time for questions, happy to answer them. If you need to move on to your next agenda item, that is fine too. And here's our email addresses. We can take questions that you have through email as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mackenzie and Jack. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Kevin, is that it? I only see initials, but there you go, Kevin.
Yes, thanks, Gina. And thank you, Mackenzie and Jack, for your presentation. Just a quick question, and I may have missed this, does the Metro District Freight Plan identify needs specific to the mode? For example, I'm most interested in rail freight needs for safety, for mobility and condition. Thanks.
Thank you. That is a great question. I believe within the category of kind of that safety bucket for the needs that were identified, there was an item related to rail crossing as a safety kind of evaluation and consideration. And ultimately, I'm not recalling and cannot access my map right now or my list of needs to know if there are specific like at-grade rail crossing locations that scored really high. But the needs that were ultimately identified and prioritized based on that scoring methodology is largely highway segments. Jack, do you recall if there were specific rail crossing locations that were showing up?
I don't remember that part specifically for roadway at grade rail crossings. So I don't have something to add.
Yeah. So I think for that, thank you for your question, and we will have to double check once we have access to our documents again and get back to you with that. So thank you.
Looks like we have a question from Innocent.
Yes. I mean, looking at the freight plan, was wondering what was the major factors that maybe find in trying to working on the plan. Was it more of the safety reasons or congestions and trying to work to reduce the congestion, or emphasis was placed more on economic development within the state?
Let's see. So I think so the Metro District Freight Plan largely was focused and was emphasizing the needs on the state highway system in Metro District as related to the safety, so crash information, as well as mobility, so the truck travel time reliability index, congestion measures, as well as factors that would limit mobility, like the bridge height clearances and low weight limits on some of our system. And then in addition, just pavement and bridge condition and how those impact the movement of freight. And so as far as, so Innocent, I think the, could you clarify the part of your question about statewide economic impact?
Yeah, for moving products from one part of the state to another or through the metro area. Because some, there is a certain area that freight seem to move kind of higher quantity of economic product more than probably using just trucking. So, and based on that, some area might be putting more emphasis on expanding because of economic development within the state.
Sure, got it. Okay. Jack, I guess, do you have any thoughts on like that statewide perspective maybe and the comparison?
No, but I don't know if, yeah, I'm not sure how to answer your question there, Innocent. I know that the plan looks at freight in a multimodal lens perspective, because you can move freight in a multimodal fashion by transporting it through various different modes, like from rail to a truck, et cetera. You can increase efficiency and in that way VMT and greenhouse gas emissions by reducing that by being able to move by barge or train for part of a freight's journey. But I'm not sure how to answer the part on the economic development piece you're asking about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Innocent.
Good.
Any other questions? We do have, I think, three more agenda items, so I might move us along and see if you have any additional questions. You can reach out to Mackenzie or Jack or myself, and I can forward those on. But thanks everyone for your attention on this, and I did put a link in the chat. Hopefully it works for you all if you did want to look at that plan and review it by the public comment deadline.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members.
Yes, thanks, Mackenzie and Jack. Moving along, we have the item on the federal roadway safety performance targets. This is one we discuss every year, and it does tend to have some meaty discussion, so I want to make sure we have some time for that. And Jed, I think you are going to present the presentation. So I'll hand it to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And for members of the committee who hear this presentation every year, I do apologize for some of the perhaps repetitiveness of the fundamentals, but we do have two changing circumstances that require us to take a little closer look at this year. So I'm going to go through the same background information that we have before. Okay, so today's presentation will provide a brief overview of our performance management program overall, regulatory requirements for the safety performance targets, our target setting methodology options, a brief assessment of performance in recent years, and then discussion and preview of the next steps. So our objective here today is to inform you the status of the other federal measures that are not subject to action, and then collaborate on revisions to the federal safety performance measures. When we brought this item last year, and then the subsequent items on the PM2 and PM3 measures related to asset management and system reliability, we had been asked by members of this committee and others to provide a more comprehensive view of performance management at the council. We're putting a pin in that. We're shuffling some staff resources around, and we'll bring that to you at a future date. So today we are focused on the federal measures. Just as background, note that these measures, they reflect federal priorities and are a narrower set of measures. They're typically required by law and have more defined methods and update schedules. We also have MnDOT's state measures that reflect statewide priorities and in some cases state statute, as well as regional measures that are more focused on regional priorities that are defined in our long-range plan and often overlap with those other two buckets. So we're focused on those federal ones today. And specifically, we're focused on the roadway safety measures. So we have safety, asset management, and reliability measures across roadways and transit, and then air quality measures, which do not apply to transit and do not currently apply to our metro area since we are in attainment. The safety measures come up every year because these are the ones that are required to be adopted every year. Asset management and reliability have a 4-year required update with an option to adjust biennially. And then the transit measures, those change more so based off of prompting actions, based off of various rules or transit provider actions. The purpose of the highway safety measures are to inform planning and programming to reduce fatal and serious injuries, as well as to track performance of the Federal Highway Safety Improvement Program. The measures are whole numbers of all fatalities and serious injuries and their respective rates per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, and then a combined measure of fatalities and serious injuries of people walking, biking, and rolling. The effect of these targets in our MPO process is they provide a summary level reactive assessment of how the region is performing on safety overall. They primarily inform our policymaker conversations on planning and programming related to safety, and they also help safety professionals and advocates elevate the importance of the issue. More importantly, our specific project selection processes use more detailed measures. So you may be familiar with how the regional solicitation, for example, measures. These overall safety performance targets do not connect directly to those programs. They don't affect how we allocate funding in those programs. And unlike state DOTs, these do not affect how HSIP is allocated. So next month in the action item, you will be considering the methodology to adopt and the target values themselves. And we are prompting this year a potential change in our target setting methodology for you to consider. Why are we doing this? Well, for starters, the plan that informs the target methodology has been updated. Our targets have been based off of a medium-term goal that was set in the Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And for the past 4 years, they've been set based off of a goal that was for 2025. In the latest Strategic Highway Safety Plan update, that same goal has been continued to 2030 unchanged. So that would have the effect, if we were to continue using that methodology, of holding our regional targets flat until the method is changed or until at least 2030. We anticipated this would occur when we were setting targets for 2025, since the difference between a medium-term target of 2025 and a short-term target of 2025 is 0. We had deferred that conversation since at the time the previous administration was considering a rulemaking to simplify the federal performance measures process for MPOs that would have changed the target setting timeline, required constantly declining targets, and specified a baseline year and more requirements around the calculation method. This rulemaking was withdrawn by the current administration, so we're now revisiting this since we have a bit more certainty about how we need to set targets this year. So we are presenting 2 options to consider for setting targets, and I will say that the differences between these are minor in the next year, but as we move further along in that medium-term period, the differences start to appear. So option A is to continue our existing methodology and hold our targets flat. So this would reduce the previous year's target towards the Strategic Highway Safety Plan goal, the portion assigned to the Metro. That difference between the 2025 target and the 2030 goal is 0, so it is holding flat despite the calculation being a decline. This maintains the tie of our safety targets to a specific safety planning effort, although it may be interpreted by some audiences as indicating a lack of progress being acceptable. The other option, option B, is to set us on a course for the targets to be at 0 by 2050. This is based off of the Imagine 2050 planning horizon. Imagine 2050 has a objective to reduce deaths and serious injuries to 0. The targets would continue declining, though at a more slow pace than they were in 2021 through 2025. It creates a direct plan connection to our regional plan. However, as you proceed down this line, it is definitely taking the aspirational approach to target setting rather than the achievable approach, because it will further diverge from performance based off of the current pace of recent trends and improvements. To describe specifically how these are calculated, this formula is used. How we calculate option A, we subtract the previous year's targets from the difference between the previous target and goal, and then divide that by the number of years until the goal year. I have 2024 listed as an example to illustrate when there is a difference between the short-term target and that long-term goal. However, since the previous target and goal are the same, the formula results in the target holding flat until that goal changes. Option B, we divide the previous target by the number of years until the goal year and then subtract that product from the previous year. This results in a constantly declining target. So for the fatality target, that would be approximately 71 rather than 74 for 2026. And you may note that's a fairly small difference, and that is largely the case across the measures for target year 2026, as displayed in this table. However, I will show, on the next slide here, that these do diverge further by 2030. So option A has remained unchanged apart from the VMT targets that are based off of forecasted growth, while the option B targets have declined more steadily. So the series of charts here illustrates the difference between these two target setting options and actual performance in the 3 whole number measures. The Met Council region has failed to improve safety below its fatality targets since target setting began in 2018, and this gap has widened both with worsening or plateauing safety performance while targets were constantly declining. The option A targets that they're illustrated on the blue line that would hold flat, and then the option B targets in green would continue to decline, though at a slower rate than previous years. The pattern for these targets is substantially the same across all measures, though I will note that on serious injuries, the gap between actual performance and target performance is much larger. There were a few years early under the safety performance rule where our targets were, we were performing better than where our targets were set. The same goes for the pedestrian and bicycle fatal and serious injuries combined measure. I'll also note, if you want detail on what is provided in these charts, on the slides posted online, there are tables with the exact data posted. So while these aren't specific performance measures for the region, the safety performance framework provides a collaborative opportunity between MPOs and the state DOTs to share data. And annually, MnDOT provides us a report that assesses regional safety performance against the SHSP focus areas. These are the focus areas where there is a significant trend noted in the most recent 5 years of data. In the Twin Cities region, inattention is trending downward. Crashes that involve pedestrian, bicyclists, and older drivers are increasing, and crashes that occur at intersections, head-on collisions, or with trains are increasing. Also, like asterisk this, these are crashes that involve fatal or serious injuries. These are not injury totals like the performance measures are. And data on the other focus areas that did not have significant trend lines to report are also provided in the slides for your reference. So ultimately, these measures serve to assess how our region is performing over time on improving our safety outcomes. Imagine 2050 adopted the Safe Systems approach, which is a framework for reducing deaths and serious injuries through systems thinking. For MPOs, the two areas within this framework that we have our greatest sphere of influence are the safe roads and safe speeds elements through our role prioritizing investments in the region. And this is reflected in our current and future activities, such as the Regional Safety Action Plan that provided a number of safety resources and program recommendations, including identification of high injury streets and crash risk. The regional solicitation evaluation remains underway, and you will hear about that in a little bit, including a proposed category focused on advancing our regional safety goal and those implementing actions in the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. Also supporting our long-range plan are a number of upcoming planning studies, including the Safer Connections to Transit, Ped Bike Demand Estimation Tool, Complete Streets Implementation Guide, and RBTN Rural Connections Studies. If you have interest in any of these topic areas, we can refer you to staff to answer questions. Oops, I skipped one. But really, the bulk of the safety implementation in the Twin Cities region is undertaken by our partner agencies who build and operate infrastructure. A small selection of these activities to highlight. MnDOT updated the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. We have 19 local governments that are undertaking planning or implementation projects funded by nearly $40 million in Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, with more application spending, and our state has been advancing safety through the Minnesota Advisory Council on Traffic Safety, which includes participation of a number of regional safety experts and policymakers. Although I'll say this is just a small selection of specific work, the transportation professionals around the region, including many members of this committee, are working on this topic every day. So what are our next steps? We'll be accepting feedback from the committee ahead of the action that's scheduled for November. We're also planning to circulate this content with a selection of regional safety experts for their feedback and review. And we'll provide a staff recommendation in the action transmittal next month. This will proceed through our typical tab-tac process before being seen by the Met Council near the end of January, so we can submit to MnDOT on time by the end of February. And with that, that's wrapping the presentation, and I'll leave you with a few prompting questions that we'd appreciate feedback on. We're curious if there's a technical basis to remove or modify any of the target setting methods that we presented. We're seeking to understand if there is a consensus for advancing one specific method, and if there are any additional comments or information that you would like us to present to policymaker audiences as they consider this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jed. I appreciate the more comprehensive presentation this time, walking us through a lot of elements of performance measures. Do you want to put the discussion questions back up? And then I will ask the committee if anyone wants to kick us off by weighing in on any of these. Maddie.
Yeah, hey, Jed, thanks for the presentation. I just had more of a general question that may help to inform at least any comments I would have on this discussion. So I'm fairly new to following or like tracking this process or like these safety targets. Can you clarify what ramifications, if any, there are in not meeting our target? So again, is this very much like we set the benchmark and we're just striving to reach that? Or when we compare like setting our own target versus following whatever higher level guidelines, are there ramifications to us as a region or to individual agencies when we aren't hitting that benchmark?
Chair and Member Dahlheimer, there are not ramifications for failing to meet these targets other than the very real outcomes of these are life-changing circumstances for people in our region. The safety performance measures that are set by state DOTs do have some interplay with their HSIP allocation. However, the targets that are set by MPOs do not currently have any tie to any sort of regulatory or funding action. The Federal Highway Administration has a stated preference that these targets be achievable. Our region has a history since 2020 of setting targets that are on a more aspirational basis. There's a pretty wide range of the way that MPOs set these targets around the region. A lot simply agree to support their state DOT target or implement their state DOT's target at the local level. There are many MPOs that are setting their target to 0. We have gone through some rounds of conversation with technical staff and policymakers in previous rounds of setting these targets where it seems our regional consensus is that we want some level of both reasonability, but also some level of aspiration in target setting. And that's why we've presented only declining options and not any options that are more tracked to performance that may increase. Does that answer your question fully?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that.
Jed, maybe I have a follow-up to this, and I don't know this. I know you said it affects MnDOT, but how does the state performance measures affect HSIP allocations? Is the state potentially penalized when they don't reach targets, or is it the reverse where if there's a larger gap?
There was a point in time I knew the answer to that question, and I do not know the answer to it.
Like, Gina, are you suggesting that if we don't meet these measures that we'd be more attracted to funding? I'm
well, I would guess that's not how it works, but
yeah, I don't think so either, but I'm just curious.
I guess I was recalling maybe it's a totally different kind of ballgame, but I think when we last talked about this attack planning in terms of infrastructure performance, I think there was a concern, that if we showed we were maybe closer to our targets, that there would be less desire for policymakers to fund like infrastructure improvements or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, I would guess that's not how it works in the HSIP world, but I was just sort of curious about that. Or maybe and now maybe I'm recalling, maybe they direct you to certain areas you're supposed to be spending your HSIP funds in or something like that. I won't speculate. Maybe did you say you're meeting with traffic in a previous slide? It looked like between now and the next time we see this, you will be meeting with or showing something to some traffic safety professionals. Did I see that in the bullet?
Yes, like for example, and some of these folks are, I think, TAC planning members already. We're planning to circulate it with the metro area staff who serve on the Advisory Council for Traffic Safety, as well as some folks who have assisted us with developing these targets in previous years. And that would include MnDOT Office of Traffic Engineering.
Okay, thanks. I would be curious very much about their thoughts on all of this. But it looks like we have a couple of hands, and it looks like Scott, you are up first, so go ahead.
Yes. So one of the things that I was curious about, referring back to that line graph, if the actual is still above and always has been above the adopted, why would we go for an option B that would even show a bigger gap? Could we not just stay with the hold flat because it seems more realistic and achievable? And if that gap narrows, then reconsider maybe an option B. Again, I don't know what the desired outcome of this is, what the gap means, dovetailing on Gina's conversation of if you're farther apart, do you receive more funding, that type of thing. But just looking at this, why would we make the gap even larger? Just a kind of a question out there to think about as we move forward. That's all I had.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Scott. I think if I'm recalling previous discussions about this, and maybe in those previous discussions, in order to be more realistic, we were actually proposing a target that would show increased fatalities and serious injuries. And I think whether you're, accepting a target that shows increased death and injury, or even more than another alternative, I think that is, I think it puts practitioners and policymakers in a difficult position, saying that like we see the trend line going in a direction that we don't want it to go, and we're sort of like accepting that and changing our targets to meet the reality instead of changing things that we can control to meet the reality. And I think we all understand it's a very complex issue, and that each of us may control like certain levers that may or may not have an impact on that. So I think that's where it becomes a difficult discussion of, do we want to present something that is a little bit more achievable and realistic, or do we want to just sort of hold the line and say, no, we are, and MnDOT is a towards zero death agency, and so do we want to just say, yeah, no, we are going to put out there that 0 is the right number. I say that, and for me, it's a difficult spot because the state highway safety plan is the hold flat target, and then we have the regional plan, which is the show 0 by 2050. So I think that's why we wrestle with this issue every year. And with that, I will be quiet, and I think Elaine was next on the docket here.
Yeah, my comment is based on from my understanding is if when MnDOT does not meet its safety targets, the HSIP funding does get shifted around to different projects to help with that. So where the metro area does not have that requirement, but I think on the state level, that is what would happen. And that might be a federal requirement of, if you don't meet your targets, you have to put more funding into it. So MnDOT would be shuffling their HSIP funding.
Thanks. And I see Steve put something in the chat. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Basically says that same thing. Basically, yeah. It's states are the ones that have consequences, not MPOs.
Okay, thanks. Charlie, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. Well, if you're asking my opinion between option A and option B, I wholeheartedly think it should be option B. As long as that line is going down, I think that's what it should be. In 99% of other performance measures, a flat target is totally fine and acceptable because it's something you're okay with if you hit it. You're trying to be with it. In this case, we're talking about safety and deaths that nobody's okay with any number, right? So it's less about true performance metrics and more about what you're trying to say and tell people and what your true goals are. And so if that green line is going down ever so slightly, which it appears to be proposed that way, I think that's the route to go. And the black line, 5 of the 8 data points made good progress, right? The slope of the black line is going down quicker than the slope of that green line. And so you're advancing towards your target in a good way. And then you had one really, really bad data point that blew it all out of the water, right? And then you're starting over again. But if you're asking me and you're looking for input about which to use, I would pick option B wholeheartedly.
Thanks for your comments. And this isn't just a discussion item, right, Jed? And we'll come back for adoption next month.
Correct.
Yeah, so we do have time to think about it. Is there anything maybe from committee members that would help, that you feel like would help us make a decision next month or guide any of that? Is there anything staff can bring back?
Yes, Chair. So 2 things I would ask. One is to review these discussion questions on your own time and consider if there are technical comments that you have that you'd like to provide. And for those of you who staff a member of, say, the Transportation Advisory Board or another policymaker, if they have a viewpoint that they would like to express on this to inform how we may narrow this down, that's also welcome.
Thanks, that's helpful for framing the issue. Right, well, I don't see anyone else jumping to make comments. And like I said, appreciate having this come forward first for information and some time to reflect and have those internal discussions and then come back next month. So I appreciate that. And I think we can move on then to the next item. I may have lost my agenda. The next item is the active transportation solicitation update. And I think we have Joe Whiting.
We're going to flip it. So we're going to let Steve and Molly just jump in front of me. I think they got more important information. And I think a lot of people have probably heard what I've had to say. So I'll come back at the end. And if we have time, we can get to my stuff. But I want to get the overall regional solicitation update first.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. All right. We will turn it over to Steve and Molly then for a update on the regional solicitation process.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me share my screen here. And Madam Chair, we have rather long PowerPoint. We're not going to go through it all slide by slide, but we did invite TAC planning members as well as F&P members to the last TAC meeting, of which I saw several people, so that was great. We didn't have a ton of discussion, I'd say, at that meeting, kind of back and forth on topics. And so the reason we're coming to you both this meeting and the next meeting is we're starting to bring materials through on the regional solicitation. So we've got 2 sets of materials. I wanted to see if there's anything that this group wants to pass on, particularly to funding and programming, which meets next week. And TAC then would be early November. To talk about the first 3 action items, and this is the setup we're proposing. So application categories, minimum maximum awards, and categories funding targets would be the first tranche of action items that come through, and it'd be both for active transportation and for the regional solicitation. So there'll be 6 action items going to funding and programming next week. And then the month after, it would be the qualifying requirements, application criteria and measures, scoring guidance, the score weighting, and then the overall package and release for public comments. We do plan to send out all of the applications by the end of this month, and we'll send them to all the committees. We'll send them to TAC Planning, TAC, Funding and Programming, and TAB, And so people can have time to look at it again. We did give the members of the special issue working groups, of which many were from F&P and TAC planning, several weeks to review it. So then we made those changes and have a clean copy ready to go back to folks, so they've got anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to look at before they're asked to do any action on it. So that's the plan. And maybe just briefly to touch on a few things. So the first action is the application categories, which is this chart, and that has not changed. Jed did reference the two new safety categories, and that's maybe one of the big stories is we've definitely heard from policymakers that they want to have targeted safety funding available. And this would be for bigger projects beyond the $2 million award that HSIP currently provides. So $2 to $7 million would be the award in these proactive and reactive safety buckets. And then the other new categories would be new interchanges and EV charging. So those are maybe collectively the new ones. And Joe Whiting will talk a little bit about active transportation categories when he comes up here. So then we did ask the technical steering committee what they'd like to put into the application for applicants and the policymakers. And this is a slight change from what we've traditionally done. They'd like this because this is the first time going through with a new structure. Their preference is to set targets, and that wouldn't be a minimum or wouldn't be exactly what the policymakers would need to spend, but it would be a rough indication to applicants of how much money is likely to go into each of these categories. So here's what the policy work group has recommended to go through the committees. $30 million for safety. That does not include the $30 million or so for Metro District HSIP. $35 million of federal funds for bike ped. It does not include the $50 million that is recommended for regional active transportation dollars. $60 million for transit, $110 million for roadways, $15 million for the environment. And that $15 million would essentially be set aside and spent 2 years from now in both of those categories. And then lastly, maybe to note on the bottom of the screen, the regional model, somewhere around $1.5 million, but that request will go through the travel forecasting committee, which some of you are on. The third item is the minimums and maximums. And so here's what is proposed. Most of them are going up several $1 million. And the one interesting thing we talked about at TAC was particularly arterial bus rapid transit. So if you look kind of in the middle there, policymakers recommended a $30 million minimum, but no maximum yet. And they wanted to see both kind of the quantity and quality of the other transit applications that were submitted. And if they did want to give more to arterial bus rapid transit above 30 million, they wanted to reserve the right to do so. We're going to go back to them and say, like, do you want to put a max amount that you'd put on there? But say if they wanted to put 35 million towards ABRT versus 30, that additional $5 million would come out of the bucket, that target for transit. Remember, the transit bucket was $60 million was the target there. So those are the notes we got from the policymakers on that to date, but looking for, again, a little bit more clarification. Here's the active transportation, and Joe can touch on that during his slides. And I don't think we'll probably go through most of these other ones here. But we do want to mention that the solicitation, probably the call for projects, is going to be a late spring activity. So one thing to know, I've been getting all of us, including Lane too, a lot of requests like, what years is the money available? So most of the money is in 2030 and 2031. Active transportation is earlier. Those projects could be as soon as, well, the money doesn't expire. So most of those projects will be 27, 28, and maybe 2029 will be the years of the active transportation. But the most of the federal money is 2030 and 2031. So a call for projects late spring, and tab action at the earliest would be kind of the end of the calendar year for 2026. So that's the calendar moving forward. We do have lots more in here, but don't need to go through all these. But we want to start previewing with folks how the point distribution is laid out on all of the categories. And we'll come back to this next month with this group too, so don't need to do it today. But it's kind of a lot for just one meeting to say, oh yeah, I agree with this or don't agree with that. But take a look at that and see if anything jumps out at you as being inconsistent with the TPP or need some more discussion. So Molly, anything on your end here? I know you're on the line.
Yeah, you wanted to maybe not go through all these individually, but maybe just highlight a couple of key things that majority of the safety categories were primarily focused on the safety criteria, and then the bike ped and the roadway applications I think are the ones that are pretty mixed. So there is safety criteria and also dynamic and resilient criteria as well in there. So they're kind of a split goal area furthering, if you will. And then same with the transit category. So those modal categories in the middle are kind of a dual goal focused application. So Steve, do you want me to go through in more detail of these, or are we thinking we want to do that next time?
I think more next time, just to give Joe Whiting a chance.
Maybe just highlighting this one. So there is the active transportation planning category. This is for the development of plans. So for communities, cities, counties, et cetera, to develop some sort of large plan, not a corridor study, but more of like a large plan that would identify active transportation priorities. This one is a little bit different, where it's the criteria or the application has been really reduced because we're asking the ask is much lower, so trying to minimize, or match the level of effort with the request. So this is a little bit more condensed. And then the community considerations criteria, which is on every application right now, as that 20% criteria amount for the scoring criteria. It will be the same set of questions for every application except for the active transportation planning grant. We did slim that down a little bit just to match, again, that lower effort of filling out that application. So I know that was a pretty quick high level, but know that we are planning to send out the draft applications for TAC planning, F&P, and TAB to review, targeting next week for that review. And then we give you, as Steve mentioned, through early November to provide some comments and feedback on where we're at with scoring measures and applications. Any questions?
Everyone must be very familiar by now.
Hopefully, yes.
All right. Well, thanks for the update. I know it's moving fast toward the finish here. All right. If there are none, I don't see any hands yet. I'll pause for another quick second, and then we'll turn it over to Joe to hear a little bit more about the active transportation solicitation.
Thank you, Chair. Quicker than I thought it was going to be, but I'm ready to go. And I'll note on the planning app on the side too, we are looking at allowing this money to be, applying for comprehensive planning support too, as well, as that's going to be kicking off next year. So we'll talk more about that in future meetings. But yeah, so I don't think it's just necessarily for a dedicated plan, but this can also be helping support your comp planning efforts as they get started and have some new requirements. I mean, where's my share button? There we go. All right, next we'll talk a bit about where we've been on the active transportation work group and the solicitation update here for that. So I will just jump in here. So I know at our last TAC meeting, and there's a lot of members here, so if I'm kind of going over some information, might kind of fly through this a little bit. So if you really want me to stop anywhere or any questions, let me know. Real quick though, just to orient us, right? So we're these three categories here, specifically the local bike, local pedestrian, and active transportation planning, which will be funded through the new regional sales tax. And first here, I'm going to go over some key policy topics the work group has discussed over the past year and has given us recommendations to move forward with, and a couple of questions that they haven't got to. Well, at the end here, now I want to open up to some feedback and considerations from our technical partners as those are weighed at the work group later this month. But so there's really a couple of key policy questions that a lot of these discussions revolved around over the last couple of months. Thinking about what are the local match requirements. So there's nothing set in state law for requiring local match or identifying what that is supposed to be. So one of the policy questions is setting that target for these grants. Also looking at the minimum maximum award amounts for these active transportation funded categories, the total funds available or the target funds available for 2026 solicitation, any geographic balance considerations, and then also finally the solicitation schedule or relationship with the federal regional solicitation moving on beyond 2026. So as Steve mentioned earlier, there's going to be kind of two tranches or two kind of packages of action items that'll be coming through the next couple months here, and the active transportation will be fit in between those with those as well. So with this first package coming in October, the project categories obviously will be one of those, and those actually received a recommendation from the work group, and that's kind of why you've seen the way it looks today. The work group recommended to have those active transportation funded projects separated from the federally funded projects by solicitation project category. So that's why you have that split in the categories. And then also then to create a new category specifically for planning for active transportation. So that's where that one came from as well. On the minimum maximum awards, which will be going to action next month, the group concurred with the proposed maximum awards. So that's $3.5 million for local bike facilities. That's $2.5 million for pedestrian facilities, and then that's $200,000 for planning projects. So it's the maximum. They on the minimum side, they actually recommended to reduce that minimum award amount for those infrastructure, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure categories to $150,000. So really looking for a wide range of projects, right? Those small projects, those bigger projects as well. So we're trying to hold anyone back from some of these local projects, right? We want to be able to get all those. And then also to be setting no minimum award for the planning category. So again, thinking about this as potentially a source of support and supplementing your comprehensive planning activities, right? You can come in and have a smaller request for planning funds, again, to support your comprehensive planning and kind of make a more robust pedestrian bicycle element of those plans. On the funding target, the work group has recommended a funding target of $50 million for the 26th solicitation with a 5% reserve. So that meets just about what we're expecting to have in the bank by the end of 26, about $52.5 million. And as Steve mentioned, this money, again, it's money that's being accrued in the account. So unlike those federal funds, we're not necessarily looking to future years and funding those projects in future years. When you're selected, or if you're selected next year, you can really begin your project as soon as you can. We already have one project completed from our pilot round, which we selected projects late last year. In Jordan, they actually were able to start their project early spring this year and complete it by August of this year. So it can be as quick as that next spring, right? As soon as you can get these projects started after selected, we can get them funded. So that's something that'll be different for everybody. And then we're also looking at a potential sub-target within that $50 million of a $2 million for the planning category. The group did not want to set targets for the infrastructure for the bicycle and pedestrian categories. Rather, they're kind of leaving up some flexibility. So having that full $50 million be the target for the whole solicitation, and then have that sub target of $2 million for the planning category specifically. Items which will be going that later date, so in November through December. The local match question. The group couldn't get consensus on a specific option, but they are moving forward with two options for the tab to make the final decision on either no local match or a very small 5% local match for these grant awards. So again, different than the federal requirements, which require a much larger match. So hopefully, again, to be able to target these funds to different communities with a smaller match is kind of the intention of this program. For project funding eligibility, connected to this match question, the work group actually did to recommend to allow for design and engineering of selected projects to be eligible for grant funding. So again, something different than our federal funds, which are really only for construction activities. This will also be open up to your design and engineering your projects as you get to that construction period. Finally, also the project category application details we'll be going through, as we're going to be looking at those later on, but those will be connected to that regional federal solicitation as well. They'll be going with that. And then geographic balance. So we'll kind of talk about what the considerations are the work group will be getting to next later this month, but really looking at what measures, if any, should be established now to ensure these AT funds are distributed across the region as they are collected via sales tax across the region. So as I mentioned, we'll kind of quickly go into those October decisions here. So the first one is that geographic balance for these, specifically for these active transportation funds. So the options that the group is really weighing and considering right now is option one is do nothing, right? So we're going to have $50 million more specifically for these projects. It potentially could be a natural, we'll see these projects spread about more naturally throughout the region, and we won't necessarily need to have to set any sort of real policy to move those projects that way. Also, early discussions with TAB members have indicated, they kind of have thought the process we have established already, at the end, figuring out that balance question, when we get the selected projects is the way they might potentially go that way too. So do nothing wouldn't necessarily do nothing. It'd be more reverting to that usual TAB process as happens for the federal projects. Another option would be to split into what we're calling geographic buckets. So those are really based on the 2050 community designations. We'll see what those look like in the next slide, and distribute these kind of earmarked for specific areas, the urban, suburban, and rural areas based upon either population or employment or some other measure like that. Then the third option they're considering is to be guaranteeing at least one project from these buckets of communities, or limit the number of applications potentially for each agency to ensure that we're not funding too much in one agency, that the funds are getting spread around to each agency in the region. So what this would look like is, see here, we've got kind of these, we've combined the suburban communities, the urban communities, and those rural communities in these buckets. And then so you'd then see that funding kind of distributed based upon either population or employment. As you can see here, what that would look like: 14 to 21 million in urban area, 18 to 25 in the suburban, and 2.5 to 6 in the rural area. So that's one of the options that's being considered here. I will note from our pilot process that we did last year, we selected 17 projects. Other 17, we did actually get projects in each one of these designations, including Jordan as they're finished, but we also got in 6 to 7 counties. So again, that do nothing option potentially could be worthwhile and something that we'll be considering here. I'll come back to this in a second for some discussion. I just wanted to get on this last question here first, because this is one that we're really looking forward to discussing how we want to schedule the active transportation solicitation moving forward. So the questions that we'll be discussing at the work group this month is really looking at both in the future, if this is going to be something we want to distribute annually, so we'll hold a solicitation every year, or will it be something that will be biennial like our federal process? And if it's biennial, would we want to see that in line with the federal solicitation? So kind of, what we're doing right now, right? So we'll release a federal solicitation, we'll release the active transportation solicitation with it, or have it be something off cycle. So one year would be federal, next year would be active transportation, federal, back and forth. And so those are kind of the options we're thinking about for the future. And then on top of that, if it was something that happens at the same time as a federal, we want to go at the same time as a federal, or maybe stagger it in that same year, right? So maybe May you have your federal, and then in April or something you had your active transportation solicitation. I'm going to stay on this slide real quick here, because I do want to have some feedback or some discussion here on thinking about this as we move forward. Thinking on your side at the technical level, if you're someone who's scored these before, if you're someone who's applied for projects before, thinking about if it's an annual process or if it's a biennial process, and if it's in line or staggered from the federal solicitation, from your point of view, do you think that there'd be a better option here, or something that would be, we should be thinking about from your side too, on staffing, application time, things like that, that we should be considering and bringing to the policymakers later this month? Would be open to any suggestions, any comments.
All right, thanks. Maddie, do you have a comment?
Yeah, sorry, delay in my thing. Hopefully, Joe, that was like do you have any comments right this moment? Because then I raised
right
my
now.
hand.
Yeah, you're good.
I think from a application perspective, I don't know that it matters is maybe a rude word to use, but I don't know that it matters whether they're together or separate. But from the scoring perspective, just knowing how much time goes into scoring, I think that's the biggest concern from our perspective of like, getting enough people to raise their hands to score and then getting through all of that if we're adding $50 million of bike ped projects to this. And if we know that we are going to have to score them together in 2026, that might be a great test to see if that if that breaks us all down or if it was very easy and we could just keep doing that moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think one thing we've got to learn is, what kind of interest this will bring, right? I mean, we don't know how many applications people will be applying for. So that's going to be, I think we're going to be learning a lot this next year.
Curious about the idea of an annual solicitation, and I'd be curious of talking with, hearing from others that apply. So kind of thinking back to when I was at Dakota County, it just seemed like we would often get projects and it was like, well, when is the next time we'd be able to apply? And 2 years away sometimes feels like a long time for an application cycle, or might be, I'm thinking about some of MnDOT's plans right now, where it might affect a local's ability to apply for a solicitation. And that this is maybe not specifically to bike and ped, but I'm thinking it could come up in an active transportation scenario where it's like, oh shoot, you're kicking this plan off too far. We're gonna have to wait 2 more years now. We're gonna miss the window to have a recommendation to apply for regional solicitation. So I'm kind of curious about that annual option, especially with the planning funds being under this category, where those may come up more frequently than an actual capital project. But I am curious for others' feedback on that. And Drew, I don't know if you're talking about that specifically or have a different comment, but go ahead.
Oh, I am talking about that specifically.
Okay, great.
So just as like a little comparison, I know MassDOT in Massachusetts runs their Mass Trails program solicitation annually, and that does include both infrastructure and planning funds. So there is like precedent for this nationally. We wouldn't be doing something totally crazy. The other thought that came to mind is if we're considering doing active transportation solicitation annually, that probably does mean that there needs to be additionally more frequent revisions to the RBTN system. Because if that's biannual, but funding is available annually, you still have that cycle lag problem.
Drew, quick on that one. So with these funds, actually, we didn't get to really go in those details, but so the difference we're really doing, we're separating those federal ped and bike funds will be dedicated for those RBTN regional trail kind of projects, and then these local funds will not have that restriction. You still can apply, right? If you're at RBTN, you can still apply for these, but you just won't get any bonus points for that. So hopefully that'll maybe ease some of that concern.
Yeah, I'm thinking from the point of view of a pretty rural county where we don't necessarily do a ton of active transportation. Those things, I think, in a lot of people's minds are the same thing, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
All right, confirm my mute. Elaine?
Now, my question is, as the applicants, one thing, if with an annual solicitation, half the funding would be available than a 2-year, and would that, so then you're only selecting half as many projects. Would you then, I would assume then you don't get funded that 1 year, you would then have to do another application the following year. Is that going to sway how many times you have to do an application, where if you do it every other year, you go further down the funding? That's another thing for you to consider.
Yeah, that's right, Elaine. So if it was an annual, right, you could imagine cutting that number in half. So probably around 20 million, 25 would be an annual solicitation versus up to 50 for these biannual. So that would be another consideration. Yeah.
It is still, I will say, 20 million. Regional solicitation, right? We were at like 30 or 35, or is that I don't know if that's
Previous ones have been pretty high just because of all these different kind of federal infusions of funds. But yeah, right now it's marked at about 35 for regional bikes right now. Yeah.
And I would just say, just in previous, just the trails application category alone, we got about 40 applications and we'd fund 10. So we would see a lot of the same applications come in even every 2 years. And now that there's more money, but that may also happen too. That's just a thought. That's why I mentioned how much effort is it for you currently doing these applications, where if you weren't funded, you'd be doing them annually.
Yeah, and I'll say that we're making these applications simpler, and so hopefully that will ease some of that burden. And also note, I think Drew, you mentioned MassDOT. So MnDOT also does their active transportation solicitations annually. There won't be an infrastructure one next year because they didn't get any money, but usually they have been doing them annually, and then the planning one too as well. So that's also another precedent that we're thinking about. But they also have dedicated staff, and they've got a whole program built up over the last 7 years, and we don't. So that's another consideration we got to think about. All right, well, I don't hear much more, so I'll just jump back to this geographic balance question, just if there's any additional thoughts here. These are the three options we're considering, but if from the technical side, if you think there's anything else we should be thinking about too as we get to a decision at the end of this month, we'd like to hear that as well. Not to force anybody, but want to hear this as much as we can for the policymakers make a final decision.
Anyone have thoughts on this? Go ahead, Manny.
I'll raise my hand again if nobody else is going to. I don't know that this is a fully formed thought, or I know from the recent discussion it was commented on that people seem to be leaning towards do nothing and see how it shakes out. The one thing that I was looking at when thinking about the slide that you all have with I guess I'd say percentages for option 2 compared to the min and max awards for projects generally, if that option 3 of do at least one in each of these areas, if that was increased to do at least 2 in each of these areas, I feel like you could almost narrow this down to 2 options, because you would still almost hit I'm thinking specifically of the rural, you'd still almost hit depending on the size of the project, that potential range.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
To have that balance. So it could be do nothing or do 2 in each of these areas as a minimum, which it could be more, or it could be more if they compete, right? But at a minimum, you do 2, and then you would hit this 6% or, whatever these percentages are for what that actually counts for in the region.
Yeah, I think that's something we've noticed too, is right. I guess especially for the rural category, that's essentially 1 project, potentially 2 at the most. So yeah, I think that's a astute observation. And I guess I'll just note too, I mentioned that as well. The do nothing option, I think, really is do nothing more than what they're already doing, because I think TAB already has that process they kind of do at the end of these solicitation award selections. They kind of naturally do these things, and so it sounded like the TAB members were interested in keeping and still doing that. And so the do nothing doesn't necessarily mean nothing's going to happen. It just means the typical TAB process is probably what would play out when we're selecting projects. Well, not hearing anything else. I guess I'll jump off here and sharing my screen. I'm still sharing. Sorry about that. But yeah, so I'd open it up though. If anything else comes to mind, please shoot me an email, shoot me a call. I'm available whenever, and we'll be preparing materials for the policymakers in the next couple of weeks. They'll be meeting on the 27th, and they'll be tackling those last couple of questions, and you'll be seeing everything next month probably, or whenever that goes.
All right, thanks, Joe. A lot of work behind this. Been talking about it a long time, that and the regional solicitation. So thanks to you and Steve and Molly for the updates on that. That is all we have today on the agenda. I think, Jed, let me just make sure. Long meeting today. Thanks, everyone. A lot of good material. Thanks for those of you who could stay till the end here. I do believe we are meeting next month, right, Jed? I talked about some items coming back, so we're definitely going to meet in, I can't believe we're saying it, November is next month. If there is no other business, we can adjourn. Does anyone have any announcements or anything for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, thanks everyone again for your attendance, participation, and for those of you who presented, and we will see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.